Andrew Lee Brock was born on February 5, 1830. He was a Virginia native and moved with his parents to Caldwell County in 1848. He married Rebecca Montgomery Wayland on December 18, 1850. Rebecca was born on February 1, 1832. Brock built this cabin in 1850 on land gifted to him and his new bride by her parents. Today, I'm meeting with Rhonda Anton Reagan at her bar, The Pearl, to learn more. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for meeting with me today.
You're welcome.
I am fascinated by Andrew Lee Brock and his history in the town of Lockhart, and wanted to bring you in today and see if you could share some of your knowledge of Mr. Brock and the Brock cabin and the history of his history here in Lockhart. I know there's several buildings. Is this part, now the one on the corner is the Brock building.
Yes.
Is this part of that?
Well, yes, this is one of the 9 buildings he built by 1901 on the square, and he built them out of masonry, rock and brick, because everything previous to that had been wood, and so he wanted it to improve our downtown area. Awesome. And he started next door, actually, with the first one in 1896 and built it, and then this one in 1896 that we're sitting in now.
Okay.
And then he went on down, and you know that this one's connected to Logos and the Apothecary, and there's 3 with double arch windows.
Okay.
And they became a trend. And he hired Gus Berkner, the German builder from San Antonio that's pretty famous, to do the construction, but Brock financed them all. So he is really one of our founding fathers.
Wow.
And he went around the corner with these and built the one the culinary room is in now, that's known as the Brock building. And it was to be two stories with a basement. And Berkner got through with the first and second floor and went to him and said, I have $7,000 left over of your money. What would you have me do? Would you like me to put a 3rd story on it? And Brock said, well, did you build it strong enough to support it? And he said yes. So they made it a 3-story building with the full basement.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And that building has been in movies.
Yes.
It's like a landmark.
It is. It's, I call it the 2nd most photographed building on the square, other than our courthouse, obviously.
Wow. That is awesome.
Yeah, it goes way back, and all the old postcards and photos on the square. You'll see this corner, but you typically don't see the southeast corner or southwest corner very much. It's hard to find photos of those buildings.
Wow.
The story goes, Berkner wrote a diary. It's on file at the Dolph Briscoe Museum at UT, and every once in a while I get some excerpts out of it. It was never published, but one of the excerpts described that when he was building this building, it tells where the rock was quarried in Captain John Lane's property on Lover's Lane, and that he hired these masons, a lot of them from Austin, to come over and lay the rock. So this was all touched by hand, wow, chiseled out and laid in 1896. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, he gave them, and at 3, a beer break. And they received a pail of beer. But I've never figured out, was it a pail per person, you know, small pails, or was it a big pail and they split it? But he went on to say in his diary that they certainly did work better after they had their beer.
That's amazing.
I think that's a great story.
That is a great story. I love it.
And to know where the rock came from, even.
Yes.
And these are connected by arches. The one next door was a stables. This became a hardware store originally, and they ended up getting shipped by rail. The train track was across 183 back then, and they would get carriages delivered here, and you could come pick out your surrey, your horse, and your buggy and all, and then they'd wheel it through that arch and if you could hook it up to your mule team or your horses and drive out.
So it was all, that's what the arches were, they were all just connected. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Okay.
So this was Seeliger's hardware store and gun shop.
Okay.
Back in the day. And the first car in Lockhart was built behind here by Seeliger's grandson, and he used a shotgun barrel for the steering wheel column and a bicycle handlebars for the steering wheel and bicycle tires. And back in the day when he built it, it took him 2 years, they say. It was finished, I think, in 1904. You couldn't buy gasoline there weren't gas stations. You had to buy it at a drugstore. So he got gasoline, it was a gas-powered engine, fired it up, and the story goes that he took it, when he fired it up and took it around the square doing about 25, 30 miles an hour, that it scared every horse and buggy out there. And one buggy took off that was loaded with sewing machines and spilt them all over the street.
Oh my goodness.
So,
that is amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what wonderful stories. I saw an article back in about 1972 that was when they were starting to prepare to move the cabin out to Lions Park. And so I guess they disassembled it and then reassembled it there where it sits now.
We're not sure if they disassembled it,
okay,
or if they moved it like we moved it.
Okay.
Which was to jack it up and put, you know, iron rails under it and move it.
Okay.
But they did, it's possible they did dismantle it because it was totally rechinked and they used too much concrete in the mix, and that deteriorates the logs. So when we moved it, our group, Friends of the Brock Cabin, we knocked all that old chinking out. We did one wall at a time after we moved it. We left it in there to stabilize it because we had to move it. And we didn't want to, but we were forced to. And so it's in a third location now. Okay.
So where was it originally then?
It's set up by that live oak tree near the public bathrooms in Lions Park.
On the back side on Bosque. Is that Bosque?
Actually, it faced 183.
Okay.
And had that tree was framing it on the left as you faced it. It was a beautiful sight. But the council wanted to put basketball goals there for the neighborhood kids, and so they asked us to move it, and it cost us, I think it was $8,000 to move it. We had to pour footings that were 4 foot deep, which the city did for us. They did that much because they actually own the cabin, and they own the land that it's on. So they showed us where they wanted to put it. We all agreed on a site, and it went out the back street, around the corner by Austin Telco, and then up 183, and everybody was placing bets that it might fall down.
Oh no.
And we were a nervous wreck, and not one log moved. Not a piece of chinking fell out, nothing. So we get it all set up, they slide it onto those piers, and there it was. So then our work began to knock the chinking out one wall at a time and re-chink it. And even our current mayor, Lou White, worked on it on a regular basis.
Wonderful.
You know, everybody got involved and learned. We used a recipe from the National Historic Preservation about how to make chinking.
Oh, wow.
And we followed that recipe so that it won't deteriorate. We had an expert in our group that really helped us with that.
Great.
We had to have strong arms to mix it in wheelbarrows and bring it over to us, and you know, you worked and worked until we got it all done.
That's amazing. So in the early, was it 2001, there was also a newspaper article about, by that time it was being privately maintained by the Friends of the Brock Cabin. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of the year, but I remember the first group that moved it gifted it back to the city. They went defunct, they dissolved, and there's a gift deed or bill of sale that they gave to the city and said it's yours, provided you keep it restored and open as a museum. And so, with that said, there was $3,500 in an account with the city to maintain it, and they had received that money by renting it out to family reunions and different people.
Okay.
And they let the roof deteriorate, and it rained in, deteriorated the floors, some of the rafters, and they had to move all the contents out because there were some antiques in it that belonged to the Brocks, and they went to the museum, the Caldwell County Historic Museum, where there were portraits of the Brocks, and they're still hanging in the first room on the left if you go in towards the front of the jail. And his saddlebags are over there, and oxen yoke and some different things. So,
excellent.
yeah.
Okay, we'll have to go over there and take some pictures.
Yeah.
So awesome. Okay, so now it is completely privately maintained, or does the city still own it?
The city owns it, and our group is just maintaining it.
Okay.
In fact, we have money in the bank still, Friends of the Brock Cabin, that as soon as COVID is over, we were about to get ready to open it this past spring, and COVID hit.
Okay.
We were shooting for April or May, and we were going to have a big fundraiser on the grounds again, because we want to have a docent who will be there on Saturdays and Sundays, the same hours as the old jail museum. But that museum is closed as well, and the docent that we had there retired because it was perfect timing with COVID, and she just stopped. So we're going to be in need of docents to work from 1 to 5, and we do open it for private tours. I get called every once in a while. We haven't put the furniture back in it. It's all in storage and storage warehouse, and we're waiting till it's open so that, you know, in case it gets vandalized, we want a presence there, that we have people there operating it. But the signage isn't up yet either. There'll be some large signs that match some that were the wayfinding committee is working with the city now, and I happen to serve on that committee as well, and we're designing the elements that will be used, you know, metal, whatever the product is, and the signs will match, and it'll tell the story of Brock. And around the back there's some of those large stones that came from the jail that was on the corner of Walnut, and you can sit there and read the interpretation of, you know, what the story that we're going to tell about Brock and his cabin. Awesome. So, yeah.
Great. So if anyone watching this would like to assist or contribute, how would they be able to do that?
Well, they could contact me through Facebook, Rhonda Reagan, Rhonda Anton Reagan, or I think our Facebook page, and we have a web page, friendsofthebrockcabin.org, and we'll accept checks or cash. We had one large donation a few years ago of $10,000 from one person to finish the landscaping.
Wonderful.
Which we want it to be native and what would have been period to 1850. So we're going to try to keep that
wonderful
theme going.
So tell me about the history of what got us to where we are today, and getting the cabin moved to its current location, and the restoring efforts, and how kind of the battles that you've fought.
Sure. Originally, the organization was called Save the Brock Cabin, and the reason is the city had published on their council agenda that they had a permit, on a bid rather, to demolish it. It was in such need of repair. They had let it go, and it wasn't being maintained. So they had a $1,250 bid to demolish it. And that's when I stepped in and said, oh no, that is the oldest wooden structure in our county that we knew of. And so it had to be saved. And Brock was an entrepreneur, that founding father of this town. It was so important to us. And so I stepped forward and said, what can we do to save it? And they said, well, you could get a petition going and get 300 signatures And we did.
Good.
And we formed a committee called Save the Brock Cabin, and that later evolved to Friends of the Brock Cabin. But and we formed that 501c3 rather. And anyway, so that's how it all got started. And there was a lot of people, locals, that would not sign the petition for various reasons. I'm not sure. I mean, people, the names would amaze you who wouldn't sign it, and some that gladly did. But we ended up convincing the city to let us go forward and save it if we would do that, and so we did. We raised the money to do all the expenses, and we had several fundraisers, 2 Christmas parties, and art shows, and we had a fried chicken in the park grounds, dinner, $10 a plate, things like that, and continued to take donations until we could get it moved and get it rebuilt.
Thank God for you.
Well, and the thing is, we got local people like donated Leo Miller and Sons that installed the roof for us with no cost.
Oh,
but the shingles are hand split, and we got them from Oregon through McCoy's.
Okay.
And it was hard to find cedar shake shingles and get them here, so those are beautiful, and the roof does not leak. It's wonderful. There's an attic that was a loft where the kids slept. You know, he had 9 children, and to think they all lived in that 2-room cabin. There was a shed on the back that we did have to remove, but originally it was probably built when he and Rebecca first moved in the house, the cabin, in 1850. It probably had animals under it. It's probably where he put his horses, you know, because that's what people did. The shed was for the animals in the beginning, and then later the family would grow and they'd expand out there, and it got closed in. And what it was closed in with, that totally had rotted. That was gone. Okay. Could not be salvaged. So it was removed.
Okay.
So it's back to the original 2-room log cabin.
Okay, and the kitchen wasn't actually in the cabin, right? It was outside?
Probably outside, unless she cooked in the fireplace. We do have one old photo that's in the book that I wrote and dedicated to him, Lockhart, and it's called Images of America. It's on Amazon if you're interested in it. It will be in 3 of the antique shops soon. I had to order some more. We're out. Awesome. But we do know that in that photograph, that oldest photograph, there was a fireplace on the end where we put the fireplace, the chimney. And we went out to the old site. The owner let me drive out there and told me there were some old stones where the cabin used to be.
Oh, wow.
So we picked up as many old stones as we could to incorporate back into that fireplace.
Excellent.
And we also used the ones that we had to dismantle it when we moved the cabin.
Okay.
So we did that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right.
But it's nice to go in there and touch one of the logs and say, you know, A.L. Brock touched this.
Yeah.
His children did.
And he built the cabin himself.
Oh, yeah.
And so he hewn all of those logs.
Yeah, and I don't know the recipe for it, but there's a time period in the phase of the moon that you're supposed to harvest the logs, and if you harvest them during that phase of the moon, they'll last forever. But if you don't, they rot. And these, we've had the Texas Historic Commission down to look at it, and we've seen oak, cedar, and I think another wood in there, I forget which one, maybe elm, and they're hard as a rock. In the front, you could not drive a nail through them. They've like almost petrified.
Oh, wow.
They're really hard.
So he picked him at the right time.
Right, he did.
Excellent. Rebecca's daughter from her first husband, he died in Dallas on their way down here.
Yeah.
And then I think she ended up, because I looked on Ancestry and I couldn't find where in the census reports she lived with Rebecca, but she was living with her parents. She lived with the Montgomerys. And she ended up marrying a Withers, and I think it was Mark Withers.
His son.
His son. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were peers, Mark Withers and A.L. Brock. They were
Okay.
the same age group. And they were both trail drivers. And this best story I've heard about the trail driving is that Mark got a new horse, and he bought it in Bastrop. And he was headed up north, with the herd, and the guy he bought it from said, whatever you do, don't tie this horse up, because it will bolt. It cannot stand to be tied. You just drop the reins and it'll stay where it is, but do not tie it up. So they go up there with their herd and they get their money, and it's all in gold, and he puts it in the saddlebags on his horse. And that night it was storming, and he thought, I better tie that horse up despite what this man says, because I'm afraid with thunder and lightning it might bolt and run off. And sure enough, he tied it up, and sure enough, the horse bolted and ran off, pulled itself loose, and disappeared. They all went out looking for it because it had all their money to pay everybody's family when they got back to Caldwell County to Lockhart. Yeah, so they looked. They never found the horse. So they rode back, and he was, really upset to have to come in and tell his wife that he lost everything. And he was home about 5 days when he got a postcard from the man in Bastrop that said, your horse came home. So Mark goes over there as fast as he can to that stables, and he was going to retrieve the horse he had bought and paid for, and he never thought the saddle would still be on it, much less the saddlebags. But there was the saddle in the room, and there were the saddlebags. And he went over and looked at them, and all the gold was still there.
Oh, that's amazing.
Isn't that a great story?
Oh my gosh.
I think that's awesome.
Oh man, God, that doesn't surprise me that the horse came home. I've heard stories like that before, where they know where they live.
That's amazing.
And once he got calmed down, he said, okay, I can go home now. That's so cool.
Yeah. Mark Withers loved his horses. That one of them that died, he had it buried on the property.
Okay. And did they live out in that same area?
They're on Borchard Loop, and they were backdoor neighbors. The kids would go play with each other.
Okay.
So
well, there you go. I guess that's why they ended up getting married, because they were.
Boggy Creek and Borchard Loop kind of run parallel.
Okay.
And the old Withers house is still out there. Have you seen it?
I have not.
You need to drive down.
Okay.
The Marshalls own the property it sits on, and that was another property that was going to be restored and made into a museum. They worked on the foundation and the roof and secured it, and then it's in the deed that if they didn't maintain it as a museum, it would revert back to the owner of the mother property, and that's what happened. So the Marshall family owns that now.
Okay.
And it just sits there. They offered it to the Historic Commission here, but the cost of moving it and maintaining it and where we move it to, it got turned down. So
is it empty?
It's empty. Their son is talking about restoring it now and moving into it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So your family owned this building?
Well, the Noltes, I'm related.
Okay.
Yeah, the Nolte family.
All right.
It was called Nolte's Place, 1940 to 1972.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so your family is from this area too, your ancestors?
Yeah. I'm a seventh generation Caldwell Countyan. Ambrose Tenney got here in 1831, and we have a copy of the land grant from Green DeWitt Colony, signed by Green DeWitt.
Wow.
And he lived out past McMinn. And if I'm in real estate, so all the surveys in that area out there will refer to the Ambrose Tenney survey in the legal description, and he's my ancestor.
That's awesome.
And then on my this is on my mother's side. She was a McGee, and then the McGee clan got here in the late 1800s, And my great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather, I guess, no, great-grandfather's name is on the cornerstone of the courthouse, George Alexander McGee.
Wow.
It was placed there in 1893 when the cornerstone was laid, and the courthouse was finished in 1894. And then Bart McGee, my grandfather, was born that year in 1893. So, you know, both sides of my mother's go way back, and then my dad was German, and his ancestors got here in 1878. They sailed into Indianola. The first one walked all the way with his belongings from Indianola to Lockhart because they were headed to New Braunfels, Prince Salm's colony, but cholera had broken out there on the ships, and New Braunfels wasn't picking anybody up anymore. They wouldn't send the wagons. So he was forced to walk, and he ended out in Lockhart. Spent the first night in a stable. And then he went and claimed his land. He bought land on 142 towards Maxwell, on the way to Maxwell. It was on the left. And he bought 600 acres and then sailed back another 6 weeks each way and brought back more relatives. And so those were the Antons. And then the Germers got here, Andrus Germer, and settled in Maxwell. And my grandmother, my Oma, was a Germer. Opa was Anton. They married, and my dad was a result of that.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Good deal.
So Daddy lived 10 miles that way, and Mother lived 9 miles that way, and they met showing calves at Lockhart High School. And that's
the rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history. You got it.
Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed learning everything about the history and about Brock Cabin and about this building here in the Pearl. And thank you very, very much for your time.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Rebecca Brock died on November 10th, 1900. Andrew Brock died on January 15th, 1904. During their lives, the Brocks were an instrumental part in the transition of Lockhart and Caldwell County from an unsettled patch of wilderness into a growing and thriving community. The Brock Cabin stands today in Lyons Park on Highway 183 across from the H-E-B grocery store as a visible testimony to their efforts and sacrifices. The Brocks and most of their children are buried in the Lockhart Cemetery.